Hello and welcome to Pedagogy in Practice. This official Old Dominion University podcast is jointly produced by the ODU Center for Faculty Development and the University Libraries. I'm your co-host Tim Heckman, and I'm the Dean of Libraries here at ODU.
And I'm your co-host Crystal Kinlock-Taylor, Educational Program Developer with the Center for Faculty Development. The purpose of this podcast is to highlight talented educators and innovative teaching practices among ODU faculty to create an engaged community of practice. With that in mind, we'd like to start with a quick disclaimer. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the co-hosts and our guests, and not of Old Dominion University.
Our guest today is Dr. Gary Beck. Dr. Beck is an associate professor in the Department of Communication and Theater Arts here at ODU, where he's also the graduate program director. Dr. Beck's research and teaching agenda blends interpersonal, lifespan, family, and professional communication. His particular expertise is centered on fostering resilience and hope in relational contexts, as well as emerging methodologies to capture contributions across time. He's the 2019 recipient of the Effective Practice Award from the Online Learning Consortium. He's also won awards from the ODU Alumni Association for New Faculty in 2014 and the Lewis Faculty Award for Excellence in Student Mentoring in 2015. And welcome to the show.
Well, Gary, I will get us started. And so who or what most shape your approach to teaching and working with students?
My experience is being a student, well, ongoing students, I guess, but my origins of where I started, I was a smart but less focused kid. And I think that in that many ways I relate to the modern student. We're all distracted by technology. For me, it was just distracted with my own thoughts. Professors would introduce concepts to me. I would check out, sometimes to follow my own thinking on topics, sometimes let my mind wander. And you think that'd be fine, but as we're learning, the flip side of multitasking is that we're not necessarily doing the deep work that we need to do to follow topics to their logical conclusions and get the deeper understandings and critical thinkings and questions that we're asking our students to look for. And so for me, when I think about who shaped, my approach to teaching and working with students, I had three professors that stood out to me. One was Joel Cohen at the University of Rhode Island, where I did my master's and my bachelor's degree. He was a professor of American history. I found that he was very demanding. He had a very high bar for what he expected from students. There was a lot of reading in his history courses. I had to alter how I approached the work that I did. And what that meant for me was that I needed to be a little bit more disciplined about the time that I was using throughout the day in order to get readings done. I had to be creative. I had to do readings in between things, as well as allocating certain blocks of time that I wanted to be doing anything else in order to be focused. And he was incredibly credible and held us accountable for the work that we brought to the classroom. And I really admired the rigor that he had in his courses. He also moved the chairs in a circle, which was a new learning style for me, in which we were accountable not only to the teacher, but to each other. We were having conversations throughout the course with each other, which was, for me at the time of my educational experiences, was more of a rare kind of classroom formation. Jeff Latham, who ended up being my thesis advisor at the University of Rhode Island for my communication studies degree, he was a big inspiration for me because he made learning relatable. And what he did is that he did a really good job of creating examples and analogies that whenever we were introducing concepts or complicated communication phenomenon or theories that we were exploring, he would do a really good job of breaking them down into common kind of day-to-day applications that you'd be like, that's the nuts and bolts of the idea. And now let's amplify it and put it in more complex communication scenarios. So that was great. And then the other one was Anita Evangelisti, who directed my dissertation at the University of Texas at Austin, Hook'em Horns. She was excellent because she was just a very kind person, but she was an encyclopedia of knowledge. She knew every communication theory, most psychological theories, all the research that had been coming out over the past couple of years. She was just fantastic, very kind soul. And I think the three of those things have really shaped who I wanted to be as a teacher. And as a student, I got to the point where I'd start to, I don't know if y'all did this, but I would observe teachers and I would say, I really like what this teacher is doing. And I would like to emulate that or look at the passion they have. And I think the combination of those three people for me really came together. And I don't know, kind of created this chimera of who I am today as a teacher.
That's great. It sounds like you really had some worthwhile mentors really help you kind of set the tone for your career then. I also like the subtle hook 'em. You guys just can't resist that, can you? Or is it like,
especially since they've been playing well lately, probably come out more than off.
You got to keep yourself entertained. So moving on to question 2. So what are some techniques and strategies other than the college football references, obviously?
Yeah, it relates to their interests, right? I mean, one of the big things I think is in the communication discipline, we say, and I'm sure it's in other disciplines too, but we commonly have the refrain of know your audience. And so I think that as we get invested in our topics and the research and the work that we're doing, we also have to remember who our students are. And we're fortunate to work at ODU, which has a diverse student body with a variety of backgrounds, life experiences, different economic backgrounds, different families of origin. All these things factor into how they see not only the material we're providing them, but their learning styles and what they want to take away from a class. I think that these diverse learning needs, relate to how we teach, but then also assess their learning. That can be from multiple choice tests and essays, but then also to modern styles of formative learning. I do low stakes learning assignments in my classes where I give them opportunities to practice the lessons. So whether it's like a conflict management skill or an application of communication methods where I'm having them do observations or some sort, the lower stake allows them to approach the concepts on their own terms, ask me questions. I often pair them up with each other. So the hurdles aren't so great and they're not so isolated in their learning experiences. And I also think that in terms of providing an inclusive environment, we also have to think of students that need digital assistance and additional learning opportunities. So that's getting them accommodations or providing them with opportunities to reach out to campus resources if they need them. But I think another part of that too is we're increasingly embracing a digital age where students are using tools outside of the classroom to benefit them. And some of that is coming from social media and saying, hey, stop wasting your time, use these online tools to help you. That raises questions of scholastic dishonesty. And I think part of that comes down to just having a really clear policy of, how you want your classroom to be run and what are the expectations. So that can be anything from how you're handling device use face-to-face, scholastic integrity with tools. I found Grammarly is an interesting thing that flags the plagiarism checkers or AI checkers, because if you're familiar with Grammarly, it will adjust key phrases to make the writing more effective. But if you click forever or use Grammarly, it'll change the entire essay, and now it's fabricated through AI assistance. But then also so I teach online Zoom courses. And so what are our policies regarding that? So am I asking students to have their cameras on? Am I asking them to be a certain way towards each other? We want to create an environment of mutual respect and acknowledging other students' learning needs and being professional. And, I expect students to have their cameras on and be present and not be laying in their beds and, half falling asleep like maybe some of them experienced during COVID, where nobody really cared because we were just happy that we were able to carry on life. But I think we just need to be straightforward with our value system and our expectations in our classroom.
Thank you for that. I like that you mentioned being straightforward with, the value systems in the classroom. And so shifting a little bit, do you have a particular assignment or classroom activity that you really enjoy doing with your students? And if so, can you tell us about it and how your students respond?
Yeah, so my classes, I was less interested in a student in classes that were incredibly theoretical and in the clouds. I wanted them to be more application based. So a lot of my teaching takes the concepts and the research and then translates it into things that students can do and practice and then hopefully implement later in their life, right? So I have low stakes writing assignments, for example, in my conflict management class. That could even be just snippets of dialogue that I've framed up or imagined that reflect some difference that they could be encountering with bosses or roommates, romantic partners. And the challenge is then to take the concept that they're learning in class, whether it's, XYZ responses or good apologies, and then respond or reframe the interaction in a way in which I'm hoping to get them to model the type of behavior that I want them to do when they get into those situations, because our instinct is to just respond and defend yourself and feel like you're affronted or that you've done everything, that you thought. And, there's very mindful people that, are fantastic listeners, but I found for the most case, we have a self-interest and people get protective. So I want to encourage my students that, there's ways that we can parse out the interactions and apply the principles we're learning in class. And so how do you get them to do it? And the lower stakes writing examples allow them to practice that. And then the step up from that is I have them analyze case studies in my class. And the case studies are scenarios of students like them that are either going through relational dramas or situations with family members. And they're drawn out longer reading studies where they then read these 5 to 10 page summaries of these people's lives that are complex and interesting and have a lot of moving parts. But then I have them write a paper that's a response to that uses applications of power or conflict styles or trip goals is one that we learn in class. And if you can do that and you can train your mind to be a more effective processor of that, then you can use it out in the real world. I use it probably too much in my marriage and in other situations, but it does help me see things that my instincts sometimes channel me down towards ineffective conflict management. So that's been really useful, and the students really respond really well to it. The other one is I don't think students in general have a really good experience writing much larger papers, and we've discovered this on the graduate level, is that you can assign like a 10 to 15 page paper, and you can say it's got to have 10 sources in it, and they need to be primary, and the paper's got to have these 3 or 5 or 8 parts. But what we find is that the instinct to procrastinate is very high because students get anxiety about the writing experience, or they overestimate their abilities, which I've been a victim of, or I've done myself. And I think that part of our job as educators that are teaching writing, especially, is teaching that the product is important, but the process is integral to getting the product to where it needs to be. So what I do is, and I've got to credit Professor Ramika Bingham-Risher from the interdisciplinary writing workshops, as well as a couple others, but her more centrally in helping me reform a lot of my classes to more of a scaffolded approach. And the scaffolded approach is basically saying, rather than just assigning the big paper at the end, let's think about ways that we can model a scholastic or academic conversation, right, that mimics what us as professionals do when we get our work out there, or they're going to be expected to do, where they turn in different versions of their ideas to bosses or supervisors or colleagues. They get feedback. And these things are often done in parts. So rather than just, hey, this paper's due at the end of the semester, I have them turn in their ideas early on, their research questions for this research methods class. I have them explore the context of the idea, come up with a bunch of primary research sources that are also in conversation with the idea. What are they doing? Summarize, organize those, synthesize them, come up with a lit review that they turn into me. Where is it going? Where's that topic or that idea going? Where are people still stuck, or where are they? What's the next step for it? And then that becomes a bridge for them thinking that they can do original research based on those ideas. So if you get them to that place, then it's a lot easier to say, okay, well, hey, we're going to propose a research study based on what you knew or what you explored. And by the end of the semester, they have a research proposal that's a 10 to 12 page paper that's well researched. It's in a novel direction. Vast majority of them, if they just had a little bit more beyond the class guidance from either a professor or someone else, they could really have something that could potentially be publishable. And so I think that, that's the foundation for doing the type of work that we expect on the graduate level. We want them to be able to, by the end of the graduate degree, not only be able to summarize works, but come up with original scholarship on their own. So, one of the things that's been really fulfilling for me as a professor is, laying that groundwork to my juniors and seniors and showing them that it's not just read and repeat, read and summarize. It's also coming up with these original ideas and valuing their takes on concepts that sometimes the articles that they summarize, and they're like, yeah, this paper is old and they have old ideas. And I'm like, well, what's the year? And they're like, well, it was 8 years ago. And I'm like, what? The time frame that I offer for including articles is 10 years, but they're finding that things 8 to 10 years are already dated for some of the topics that they're exploring. And so that puts more pressure on them and us to constantly keep engaged with the topics and on top of the material. So I think that's a part of the discovery as well.
That's excellent. I really appreciate that approach. I feel like I would have benefited from that at various levels of my education. So I'm also glad you gave a shout out to Ramika, because she was on the show here a couple episodes ago, and she has just tremendous expertise and the way that she approaches helping faculty learn to, like you said, scaffold assignments and just, adjust their teaching. I think she does really tremendous work. So I'm glad that you talked about her a little bit. So you mentioned Zoom a little while ago. How do you adapt your teaching strategies when you transition between the online and the in-person environments?
I came from a place of saying all my classes are face-to-face. How do I get them into online spaces in ways that preserve the values that I have come to not only see are important to the students, but that represent me as an educator. I don't want to be like a mindless, soulless shell that's just dispelling information online. And at the end of the day, at the end of the semester, I'm not gratified or fulfilled by the career anymore because I can't put myself into it the way that I want and I know students resonate with. So that's been a challenge. But I think there's a couple things that I've picked from my face-to-face classes that really work online. One of which is I love participation. We need to talk about complex communication issues. I want to hear what students are experiencing. And the initial translation of that was discussion boards. What we learned is that students don't like discussion boards. They work for some topics. They don't work for others. Some students really just give the cliche, like they'll give a basic response to a post. And then when you ask them to respond to other students to mimic kind of the conversations that you want to have going on in your class, they respond like, great thoughts, you're doing awesome ideas, keep it up. And it's like, that's not valuable. So what I've done is I've converted those to blog posts. I've had them write longer form writing, but then the students only respond to one other person. I want them to think about other people's ideas and get out of their own heads, but I also don't want to fabricate this kind of conversation space that the students feel is unnatural to them. So that's responding and knowing your audience. I think I've also thought about how I'm assessing my students' learning. And so my tests have had to change. So the online formats, it's incredibly tempting to cheat. So I've just made them open book. But as a result of open book, the rigor of the test changes and the time frame in which they're having to complete it changes to the point where the students are rewarded if they actually do the prep ahead of time and they know the material. If the time frame is shorter to complete the work, then you have to know it. You can look it up, as anybody can, but if you spend too much time looking the stuff up, you're going to run out of time on the exam. So it really prioritizes the students doing the prep work ahead of time. And I find that students suffer from attention span issues. I think I mentioned that earlier. But my students in my Zoom classes, we have a 2 hours and 50 minutes or whatever the time frame is for the night classes. I used to have a break in between at around like an hour and a half into class, and then we'd have the second half of class. Students told me that, and I always thought that time frame allowed them to take a step away and go have, dinner if they hadn't had dinner yet, or go connect with their family, tuck their kids into bed, or whatever their lifestyle is, right? Well, I got feedback that they preferred 2 breaks, shorter breaks, but 2 breaks. So changing the reception of the material to these shorter time frames made it more digestible. So we would do shorter breaks, but 2 throughout. So every 50 minutes or 45 minutes. The other thing too is they talk a lot about eye strain. So they want to turn their cameras off when it gets later at night. And if you think about how our students, half of my graduate program is non-traditional. So they're working jobs where they could potentially be staring at screens all day. They're checking out on their phones. And then I'm asking them to be online for another 2 hours and 50 minutes. And part of the instinct is to say, well, that's the gig for 2 years. If you want to get a master's degree, this is the learning format and this is what we're doing. But part of, our job beyond the material as educators is to think, how can we manage that, or how can we guide them better? And so I'm pretty relaxed in the sense that if the students need breaks, just send me a message and say, hey, I'm taking a break. I'm getting a little bit of a headache, being open-minded to their needs as learners, but then also coaching them during graduate orientation to say that, yes, the students have reported these things have happened. you need to monitor throughout the day how much you're staring at screens so that you're not getting to a place where your tank is empty by the time you get to our class at night. Manage that a little bit more so that you get into a place where 8, 9 o'clock at night, you're not ready to quit when we still have another hour's worth of material to cover at the end of class. And I think guiding them around the meta learning or the learning around the learning, the process around the learning, I think is super important there. The other thing that I think is really important is that I think there's values that are enduring across face-to-face and online that I've tried to emphasize. And some of them are cliche, but I really think it's important to make sure that you have consistent. And I found that across my 20 years or so of teaching, that students value professors with a positive attitude. You can be the cynical professor who's kind of edgy, but they still want to know that you want them to be there and you want them to learn, right? And you have an attitude that in which you're receptive to questions and you're interested in their curiosities about the material. They want to feel that from you. And you can convey that in online formats, whether it's how you communicate them through their weekly messages in your asynchronous courses or your feedback on your assignments, or through how you greet them when they come into your online course before the start of the Zoom course. It's certainly easy to convey in the start of a face-to-face course or throughout the course when you thank them for their questions, or afterwards, tell them how you really appreciated their contribution or something. Those little things matter. I found timely feedback, whether you're online or offline, is just so important, especially as students kind of demand it now more than often. I have students emailing me where's my grade? And it's literally been 2 days since they turned in, an 8-page paper, and they're in a class of 40 people. I'm good, but I'm not that good. So, that's a lot of work. And I think managing their expectations is important. Having up-to-date materials is just so important. And I think students sense when their online materials haven't been updated in a while. So I guess my suggestion there would be to just make sure that the online materials really doing that work before the start of the semester and doing a thorough review. Is this work representing the concepts well? And is it relevant and recent? And do the links still work? Students are generally pretty forgiving if one or two of them don't work throughout a semester. But at the same time, I also think they expect that you're going to be prepared if you're going to expect things from them.
Thank you for that information. For our last formal question, how do you stay up to date on the latest teaching strategies and tools? And can you recommend any resources that have helped you along your teaching journey?
Yeah, so I'm not as much of an early adopter as I'd like. So I think that there's people that I've been lucky to be plugged into that are, and that's the key. I think there's so much changing about our digital world that it can become overwhelming. It can feel like you're chasing a bit of a rabbit. And some of the resources that I've really benefited from, either on campus or otherwise, I really like Megan Mize's Center for ePortfolios and Digital Initiatives. They've been an incredible benefit to the grad program. There's so many positive advantages or benefits to having ePortfolios as a part of your class, either as an opportunity for students to do web page creation, converting assignments to an online format so that then they can share them with the world, or creating personal web pages. And I know that there's a lot of other things that Office does, but AI workshops that the campus offers, I've participated in a couple of them. Admittedly, it's felt a little overwhelming at times, and I don't think that's because of the presenters or because of the topic materials, but I think we're all kind of, in a way, struggling or grappling with the challenge of tracking the conversion of how we learn from the formats we've used before to now implementing what AI allows us to do. So a lot of the questions that maybe we had students work through on a more fundamental level, they can just type into AI and get the answer super fast and super easy. And then the default is to be like, well, AI figured it out for us. What's the next question? And I think that next question is really where, a lot of the transformation in our courses needs to happen. And so, even like a lot of my blog posts, you can copy the blog post, type it into ChatGPT and say it needs to cite this author. And then all of a sudden they can come up with a response. And now I'm literally able to read AI voice. Like, when we can hear that students haven't done the readings because they're not reflecting the jargon or they're not reflecting the writing style very well, you can hear AI voice. And so I think, part of that is, you can build in little tips and tricks where you put words in that are the same color as the background on your canvas that are hidden, and that if they copy and paste it, it'll, you can have like elephant or something in there, and then the AI will kick back something about elephants, and then the student will mindlessly paste it thinking that, I guess this discussion post is about elephants. So there's tricks you can do. And I've been really into like having them explore applications of AI or other tools online, and then coming back into class and having the conversations kind of already in motion, rather than just trying to start fresh after people get off of their day and they're like, what is Dr. Beck going to talk about this time? So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to integrate all that. The campus resources I would suggest, Dr. Mize's office, as well as any of the AI trainings. Every conversation I've heard says that we need to get as acclimated as possible to AI and meet our students as educators in ways in which we can guide them towards ethical uses, not just punishing them for trying to find shortcuts.
It's definitely been like drinking from the fire hose a little bit. So I applaud you finding ways to work it in sort of more manageable and meaningful ways without the kind of knee jerk, either all in or all out sort of thing. I think that's the right approach at this particular moment that a lot of people are struggling to find. So I'd be curious, as this sort of experiment, or not even experiment, as new way of living goes along, how that evolves for you. So we'll have to have you back maybe in a year. So that's our formal questions. So to wrap up, we'd like to ask our guests just a couple of quick kind of fun questions just to help get to know you a little bit better. And so the first one is, what was the last book you read or listened to?
It's a lot of psychology, communication, scholarship primarily, but I'm halfway through Atomic Habits. I'm really interested in how people get new, routines to stick, and, how do we change, the flow of our lives in ways in which we know we should be doing something differently. And whether that's picking up yoga for you, Tim, or starting to watch more documentaries as opposed to reality TV, nothing wrong with reality TV, for example, or gardening. Like, how do we build in time for that? I found that time is such a luxury in the sense that I feel like I'd never have enough of it, and I'm constantly juggling all my responsibilities. So developing routines, procedures, and ways for living your life in which, not that you turn yourself into a robot or a cyborg, but that you allow yourself, the appropriate time to get the benefits out of things that maybe you should be doing or you really want to do, but fitting them in is important. I find it's a useful, interesting book to read, but halfway through it, so we'll see where it goes. Yeah. That's what I'm digging around now. I'm currently I'm very in my own academic readings and read a lot of material on resilience and hope and savoring and all these kind of positive communication concepts that I'm kind of over positived at the moment, but it can be uplifting at times.
Atomic Habits is great. Elevate by Robert Glazier is another. It's kind of in that vein. If you might want to check that one out too. So other than robot directed yoga after a long day,
I do something that's kind of cheesy, and I'm bracing for eye rolls, but I do something called iron therapy. And iron therapy is like a cheesy way to just describe. I like going to the gym. And I like exercising. I found that I have to get out of my head. I'm in my head constantly. And maybe it's the nature of the work we're doing, or just, I'm constantly trying to channel that spot where writing becomes easier and the ideas are flowing, and I'm naturally pulling from all this compendium of knowledge that I have over the past 15, 20 years of doing resilience scholarship and positive communication, that, I can access it all very easily. But as a result, it's exhausting mentally. And I find that getting into my body really hurts. Yeah, it hurts, but it helps. I know I like going to the gym, and I like setting goals outside of academic ones and outside of that for my family and for my wife and relationship and stuff. I like having my own thing. And so I go to the gym, I get a sweat on, I have my own kind of things and my own routines that I like to do. I go to my local YMCA, and my kids there in their activities, and I'm there getting the benefits of exercise. So it all kind of feeds into each other. I also have to state this. I started walking in the morning and I'm loving it. So I get up in the morning and rather than immediately go and check my email and stuff, I go out for a walk. And I've had people ask me, like, how long do you walk for? Or do you walk at a certain pace? I go with what the day tells me. Some days I'm hurting and I don't want to walk for very long. Some days the weather's weird and I don't want to be out there for too long. Or some days I'll have a meeting, like I'll have a podcast to do or something. And, I find that the walking actually is incredibly healthy and makes me feel more ownership of, the decisions I'm making in a given day. And it's just, getting sun and getting fresh air and seeing trees, like all of these things, especially for people that work in front of their computers all day. It's good to go out and they say touch grass. I'm touching pavement. I'm, having fun just walking around.
I love that.
And it's free. It's free. Other than the shoes that you're going to be wearing through. I mean, I guess it's been a good experience for me.
So did the AI, when you asked for the kind of life advice, was it AI that told you should be walking daily?
It didn't, but what it did told me was it told me to get up at 6:30 in the morning and start meditating, which some people 6:30 is no big deal. I've got a neighbor that gets up at 5 a.m. and goes to the gym every morning, but he's also in bed by like 7 o'clock at night. But, it did tell me to give more space for myself. So, I found like when I talk to colleagues, and tell me to stop talking if I'm going too long, but I find that colleagues tell me that they stay up too late because they want to reclaim part of the day for themselves, whether it's watching documentaries, flipping through their phones, or whatever else. And that's fun. A flip side of that, though, is claiming some of that day in the morning. And if you can retrain your process to like not hate getting up in the morning, you all of a sudden discover that the morning's pretty quiet too. Not a lot of people are up that early or doing things, and you can really make some use of that. And I never thought I'd say that because it feels kind of lame and squarish to get up super early in the morning when, my whole life I've been rolling out of bed and kind of rushing to class, but, not rushing is kind of a nice feeling as well.
No, I love all of this. I hope you put your white New Balance on.
New Balances are super comfortable, so
old dad style. All right, last question is, what do you like best about your role and your work as an educator?
Wow. So admittedly, I like the flexibility that our job has with it. So as an educator, I do have fixed times that I teach, but the week is one of the benefits of living the professor life is that you get an opportunity to claim other periods of your day for things. I just can't sit there and just type. I need time to process ideas. I need time to read. I need time to step away and look at things from a distance or come back to it. And all of that space in your week is there for a reason. And I think the challenge for anybody is managing that time effectively and allowing yourself the grace to have that and do it with fidelity and make it a part of a process. So you kind of have to have a philosophy about it, but I love the fact that I have the flexibility to do that. It does make me the point person at this point in my life with my kids because my wife has more of a standard 9 to 5. Downside is I'm thinking about work constantly. So, before I go to bed, like I said with my reading materials, I'm oftentimes reading things related to my concepts or my ideas. I'm journaling related to the ideas that I want to explore and research. So it's always about research, which can get a little exhausting. But the other thing I really love is that being in education, I think a lot of the listeners can relate to this, is that we are having an impact on the lives of people that are in a phase of their life that are figuring out what they want from their lives. We're in an important profession where we're interacting with people that are figuring it out. They're figuring out what they should care about and what is important and what skills do they need to make the most of their lives and who should they prioritize? What are good people? What are bad people? All of these decisions, even if you don't have those questions on the surface in your classes, which most of us don't, they're reflected in how you emphasize certain ideas and what things you ask them to be curious about and how you ask them to hold themselves accountable to deadlines. And all of that results in transformation. And the students, if you get like a really good relationship with your students, or it may not be all of them, it may be a couple of them, right? It may be one in one semester where you see them go from someone who's more tentative to someone who's a lot more certain, or they have a less clear vision for their project idea, and then at the end it turns into something that's really fantastic. There's something really gratifying in having that experience. And so I never have to question with this profession whether or not there's an impact or there's a positive change that's going on from my investment. And I think that there's so many people out there with other professions where the cliche is they feel like a cog in the wheel. And I've never had to feel that way in education. And I think that's an incredible value to the profession we're in that shouldn't be understated, and, you know, people should reflect on and really take away as a benefit.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Pedagogy in Practice is an official podcast of Old Dominion University, the Center for Faculty Development, and ODU Libraries. Your co-hosts are Crystal Kinlock-Taylor and Tim Hackman. Original music composed and copyrighted by Richard Sigwald. Find and follow us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Visit ODU's Center for Faculty Development homepage for more information about the show and for more information about ODU. Thanks for listening.